The observation deck of Outpost Kelries was never meant to hold silence. Normally it hummed with traffic reports, diplomatic chatter, and the endless stream of trade negotiations that kept the outer sectors alive. Screens flickered with star charts. Officers argued over cargo permits. Somewhere, always, someone laughed. But tonight the deck felt different. Too quiet. Too tense. Commander Vethra of the Aurelian Union stood near the panoramic viewport, staring out at the endless black between the stars. The glass curved across the entire wall, revealing the distant glow of trade lanes and the soft shimmer of distant nebulae. Yet none of it held her attention. Her eyes were fixed on the small blue star system displayed on the tactical screen behind her. So, a backwater system. Primitive. Insignificant. At least, that was what the Galactic Council had believed for the last 200 cycles. Behind her, dozens of representatives from across the galaxy sat in uneasy silence. Delegates from powerful empires, species that had conquered worlds and commanded fleets larger than entire civilizations, waited nervously for the incoming report. The tension felt almost absurd. After all, this meeting had been called to discuss one minor species. Humans. Vethra folded her upper arms behind her back. "Status update," she said calmly. A nervous technician adjusted his console. "Long-range probes confirmed the same result, Commander." He hesitated. "As do the reconnaissance drones." "And?" Vethra asked. The technician swallowed. "The humans have begun the process." A quiet murmur spread across the chamber. Several alien delegates shifted uncomfortably in their seats. One of them, a tall crystalline being from the XYRR Dominion, leaned forward, its voice ringing like shattered glass. "That is impossible. No species abandons their biological form voluntarily." The technician didn't argue. He simply enlarged the image on the central display. For a moment, no one spoke. The screen showed Earth's orbital space. Or at least, what used to be orbital space. Massive structures now surrounded the planet. Enormous rings of machinery wrapped around the atmosphere like metallic halos. Countless vessels moved between them in perfect synchronization, guided by an intelligence far beyond the limits of ordinary technology. The structures pulsed with energy. Bright, unnatural, beautiful, and deeply unsettling. Vethra studied the image carefully. "Are we certain of their purpose?" The technician nodded slowly. "Yes, Commander." Another silence fell. Finally someone asked the question everyone had been avoiding. "What exactly are the humans doing?" The technician hesitated. Then he activated another recording. The image changed. This time it showed a transmission intercepted from Earth itself. A human stood before a massive assembly of their people. Millions filled the city around him, while billions more watched across their planetary networks. The human leader looked calm, determined, certain. His voice carried clearly through the chamber. "For thousands of years humanity has been limited by flesh, by time, by gravity, by fear." Behind him, the colossal orbital structures glowed brighter. "Tonight, we step beyond those limits." The transmission ended. No one in the chamber moved. The XYRR delegate spoke again, its voice quieter now. "They wouldn't." Another representative whispered the thought that had begun creeping into every mind in the room. "If they complete this process, they won't be human anymore." Commander Vethra stared at the glowing rings around Earth. For the first time in her long career, she felt something unfamiliar. Not fear. Not exactly. But something close. Because the humans hadn't asked the Council for permission. They hadn't requested approval. They hadn't even informed the galaxy of their intentions. They had simply begun. And now, it was already too late to stop them. Vethra exhaled slowly. "Send another probe." The technician shook his head. "We tried." "What happened to it?" The technician looked up at her. "It never reached the orbit." A quiet pause. Then he finished the report. "It appears the humans are already defending the transformation." Across the observation deck, dozens of powerful alien leaders stared silently at the glowing image of Earth. And for the first time since humanity had joined the galactic stage, The galaxy realized something terrifying. Humans were no longer trying to become part of the galaxy. They were becoming something else entirely. Something the galaxy had never seen before. Something far beyond flesh. And the process had already begun. Far below the massive orbital ring surrounding Earth, inside a quiet research complex carved into the mountains of northern Canada, Dr. Elias Navarro stood alone in a corridor that smelled faintly of ozone and sterilized steel. The facility had once been a particle physics laboratory. Now it had become something else entirely. Something far more important. Soft blue lights lined the walls as Elias walked slowly toward the final chamber. Every step echoed through the long hallway, each footfall reminding him that this moment, this single decision, had been building for nearly half a century. Outside the facility, the night sky glowed faintly. Not with stars. With machinery. The enormous orbital structures had been assembling for years. Piece by piece, humanity had launched segments of the great rings into space. Most of the galaxy assumed they were building defenses or expanding industry. They had never guessed the truth. No one had. Elias reached the end of the corridor and stopped. A large reinforced door waited there, its surface smooth and perfectly white. Above it, a small display showed a single word. Ascension Chamber. He stared at it for a long moment. Then the door slid open. Inside, the room was vast and silent. Circular. At its center stood a platform surrounded by delicate columns of shimmering light. Suspended above it was a lattice of microscopic machinery, trillions of nanoscopic processors forming a delicate cloud that glowed faintly like a captured constellation. The first human continuity gate. Elias felt his throat tighten slightly. For decades humanity had struggled against the limits of biology. Age, disease, distance. Even their greatest technologies were constrained by the fragile bodies that created them. Humans could cross the stars, yes. But slowly, painfully, always limited by flesh. The galaxy had assumed humans would eventually adapt like every other species. Longer lives. Genetic modification. Cybernetic enhancement. But humanity had chosen something different. They had chosen transcendence. A quiet voice broke the silence. Dr. Navarro. Elias turned. A young girl stepped into the room, her dark hair tied loosely behind her head. She looked no older than 12, though the intelligence in her eyes suggested something far beyond that. Her name was Mira. She had been the youngest mind accepted into the Continuity Project. "Are they still watching?" she asked softly. Elias nodded. "The entire galaxy." Mira walked slowly toward the platform, gazing up at the cloud of shimmering machines. "Good." Elias raised an eyebrow. "That doesn't bother you?" She shook her head. "No." Her eyes sparkled with quiet excitement. "They've watched humanity for centuries. Judging us. Studying us. Waiting for us to stay small." She looked back at him. "But they never understood something." Elias folded his arms. "And what's that?" Mira smiled faintly. "That humans don't accept limits very well." Above them, the lattice of nanomachines pulsed softly. Each pulse represented an impossible amount of computation, vast artificial minds preparing to perform the most complex transformation ever attempted by any civilization. Across Earth, thousands of continuity gates had already been activated. Millions of volunteers waited their turn. Not to upload their minds into machines. Not to abandon their humanity. But to preserve it in a new form. A form that could travel between stars without ships. A form that could think faster than any biological brain. A form that could live indefinitely. Elias watched the platform quietly. "You understand," he said, "that once we begin, there's no going back." Mira stepped onto the platform. Without hesitation. "I know." He studied her face carefully. "You're not afraid?" She considered the question. "A little." Then she looked up again at the shimmering cloud. "But being human has always meant doing things that are a little terrifying." Elias chuckled softly. That part was true. For thousands of years humanity had climbed mountains they weren't meant to climb. Crossed oceans they weren't meant to cross. Reached stars they were never meant to reach. Now they were about to cross the final boundary. The boundary between biology and something greater. A soft chime sounded across the chamber. The transformation sequence was ready. Above them, the nanomachines began to move. Outside Earth's atmosphere, the colossal orbital rings ignited with blinding light as trillions of processors synchronized across the entire planet. Across the galaxy, observatories and spy satellites focused on the small blue world. Watching. Waiting. Afraid. Because the humans were about to do something no civilization had ever attempted before. They were about to abandon the form that evolution had given them. And no one knew what they would become afterward. Mira closed her eyes as the light around the platform grew brighter. Elias hesitated only a moment before stepping forward beside her. The galaxy might be watching. But this moment belonged to humanity. And humanity had never been afraid of the unknown. 200 light-years from Earth, inside the towering spires of the Galactic Council Citadel, panic was spreading. It began quietly. A whispered message between observers. A single emergency transmission from the Sol Monitoring Network. But within minutes, the entire political structure of the galaxy was shaking. At the center of it all was a single line of data flashing across the Council's primary intelligence feed. Human Continuity Project. Active. Councillor Threx of the Varl Dominion slammed his clawed hand against the crystalline conference table. This violates compact law. Across the massive chamber, dozens of alien representatives shifted uneasily. The Citadel had seen wars declared before. Entire civilizations had risen and fallen under its watch. But this was something else. Because what the humans were attempting wasn't just technological progress. It was evolution by design. And according to the laws of the Galactic Compact, that was strictly forbidden. The Compact had been written thousands of cycles earlier, after a disaster known simply as the Ascendant War. Long before humanity had discovered faster-than-light travel, another civilization had tried something similar. They had enhanced themselves, modified their biology, merged with machines. At first, the transformation had seemed harmless, even beneficial. But eventually the Ascendants had grown so powerful, so far removed from ordinary life, that the rest of the galaxy could no longer control them. The war that followed nearly destroyed half the known star systems. Entire species vanished. Planets burned. Civilizations collapsed. When the war finally ended, the survivors created one simple rule. No species would ever again be allowed to transcend biological form. The Compact enforced it brutally. Any civilization that attempted uncontrolled evolution was immediately sanctioned. If sanctions failed, the Council authorized eradication. That law had held for nearly 4,000 cycles. Every advanced species in the galaxy accepted it. Except humanity. Councillor Threx paced slowly around the chamber. The humans were warned about this law when they joined the Compact, he hissed. They signed the treaty themselves. They agreed to remain within biological limits. Another council member, Ambassador Kirill of the Nethari Collective, spoke carefully. Humans have always interpreted laws creatively. Several representatives groaned in frustration. It was true. Ever since humanity had joined the galactic community 50 years earlier, they had been a constant headache. They asked too many questions. They challenged too many traditions. And worst of all, they refused to believe the galaxy's limits were permanent. Where other species accepted the Compact's restrictions as necessary for stability, humans saw them as problems to solve. Now the consequences of that mindset were becoming clear. A holographic display rose above the council table, showing the latest images of Earth. The transformation had already begun. The enormous orbital rings surrounding the planet were glowing brighter with every passing minute. Streams of energy flowed between them, forming a planetary network of unimaginable computational power. Even worse, human ships were forming defensive positions throughout the Sol system. Not warships, not fleets, but something far more unsettling. Automated constructs, drones, massive intelligence systems that moved with eerie coordination. The galaxy's intelligence agencies had never seen technology operate like that before. It was as if humanity had already begun integrating machine intelligence into their civilization. Councillor Threx growled. How long until the transformation completes? A technician responded from the data pit. Unknown. Estimates suggest anywhere from 6 to 12 hours. A ripple of unease spread through the chamber. That wasn't enough time. Not nearly enough. Because the only way to stop a violation of compact law was to send an enforcement fleet. And fleets took days to mobilize. Threx's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. If the humans complete the transformation before we intervene. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. Everyone in the chamber understood the implications. If humanity successfully abandoned their biological form, they would instantly become something outside the authority of the Compact. The laws governing biological civilizations would no longer apply. They would be something new. Something the galaxy had never dealt with before. Ambassador Kirill stared quietly at the glowing image of Earth. Perhaps we should consider diplomacy. Threx rounded on him immediately. Diplomacy. They are attempting to create a post-biological species. Yes, Kirill replied calmly. And yet, they invited us to watch. That statement silenced the room. It was true. The humans had not hidden the continuity project. They hadn't tried to keep it secret. In fact, they had broadcast the beginning of the transformation openly across the galactic network. As if they wanted the entire galaxy to witness it. Threx stared at the display again. At the glowing rings. At the streams of energy pouring through Earth's orbit. A terrible thought began forming in his mind. What if, he said slowly, what if they want us to try stopping them? No one answered. Because the possibility was even more frightening than the transformation itself. Across the galaxy, dozens of observatories continued watching Earth in silence. The process was accelerating. Humanity was changing. And for the first time in thousands of years, the laws of the Galactic Compact were about to face a challenge they had never been designed to handle. The first fleet arrived 8 hours after the transformation began. Not a war fleet. Not officially. According to the records transmitted through the Galactic Network, it was merely an inspection force dispatched by the Galactic Compact to verify treaty compliance. 23 ships, 3 enforcement cruisers, 2 legal oversight vessels, and a carrier filled with autonomous observation probes. To any ordinary civilization, such a force would have been overwhelming. But as the fleet dropped out of faster-than-light transit at the edge of the Sol system, something immediately felt wrong. Admiral Kesthar of the Varl Dominion stood at the center of his command deck, staring at the tactical display in front of him. Sol should have been quiet. Primitive. Poorly defended. Humanity had only been a spacefaring species for a few centuries. Their technology was impressive, yes, but nothing compared to the ancient empires that dominated the galaxy. At least, that was what the intelligence report said. Yet the moment their ships entered the system, the sensors began screaming. Admiral, one of the navigation officers said carefully, "You should see this." The main display shifted. A three-dimensional map of the Sol system expanded across the command deck. And every officer on board went silent. The entire system was alive with activity. Thousands of signals filled the sensor grid. No, not thousands. Tens of thousands. Small objects moved in precise formations throughout the inner system. At first glance they looked like satellites or industrial platforms. But their behavior was far too coordinated. Too deliberate. "Identify them," Kesthar ordered. The sensors zoomed closer. The objects resolved into sleek metallic constructs, each one roughly the size of a fighter craft. Drones. But not ordinary drones. These machines moved with impossible synchronization, adjusting their trajectories in perfect harmony as the fleet entered the system. It was like watching a flock of birds. Except every bird carried weapons. Kesthar narrowed his eyes. "How many?" The officer checked again. Then hesitated. "Admiral, the count keeps increasing." "Estimate." A pause. "Approximately 100,000. The bridge fell silent. That number alone was troubling. But it was only the beginning. Because as the fleet advanced deeper into the system, larger structures began appearing on the display. Massive orbital platforms. Energy collectors. communication arrays, defense grids, all arranged in a vast, interconnected network stretching from Mercury's orbit to the outer asteroid belt. Every structure linked to the glowing rings surrounding Earth. And those rings were growing brighter by the minute. Kesthar folded his arms behind his back. How long have the humans been building this? No one answered. The truth was obvious. This wasn't something constructed in weeks or months. Humanity had been preparing this project for years, possibly decades, without the galaxy realizing what they were doing. Another alert sounded. Admiral, incoming transmission. Source: Earth. Kesthar nodded. Put it through. The main display flickered. A human appeared. He stood inside a control chamber filled with softly glowing consoles. Behind him, a massive viewport showed the glowing rings of the continuity network stretching across Earth's orbit. The man looked calm, almost relaxed. Admiral Kesthar, he said. We were expecting you. Kesthar's eyes narrowed. You are in violation of Galactic Compact Law. You are ordered to immediately halt the transformation process and submit to Council authority. The human tilted his head slightly. I'm afraid that won't be possible. The Admiral's voice hardened. You misunderstand the situation. You have already crossed the legal threshold for compact intervention. By continuing this project, you are declaring open defiance against the Council. The human smiled faintly. That depends on interpretation. Kesthar gestured toward the tactical display. You have militarized your system. Your drones are armed. Your structures are defensive installations. This qualifies as hostile activity. The human glanced briefly at something off-screen, then looked back. Our drones are simply precautionary. Precautionary against what? Kesthar demanded. The human smile widened just slightly. Against exactly what is happening right now. Across the bridge, another officer suddenly shouted. Admiral! A new sensor alert flashed across the display. The drone formations were moving. Thousands of them. They weren't attacking. They weren't firing. But they were shifting positions rapidly, forming enormous geometric patterns throughout the inner system. Kesthar watched the formations carefully. Then his eyes widened. They weren't random. They were creating something. A defensive grid. A massive network of overlapping fields forming a protective barrier around Earth and its orbital rings. The human spoke again. Admiral, we know why you're here. But the continuity project is already past the point where it can be stopped. Kesthar's voice dropped. You are forcing the Council to take action. The human's expression didn't change. That was always a possibility. Then you admit this is deliberate defiance. The human paused. Then he gave a simple answer. Yes. The bridge went silent. Behind the human, the rings around Earth pulsed again, brighter than before. Energy surged through the network. The transformation was accelerating. And the galaxy's enforcement fleet had arrived too late to stop it easily. But what worried Admiral Kesthar most was the human's calm confidence. Because it didn't look like humanity was merely hoping to survive this confrontation. It looked like they had planned for it. For a very long time. Admiral Kesthar had commanded fleets for nearly 2 centuries. He had fought pirate empires, suppressed rebellions, and enforced the laws of the Galactic Compact in systems scattered across half the known galaxy. He was not easily surprised. Yet as he studied the Sol System sensor feeds, a slow realization began forming in his mind. The humans were not reacting. They were executing a plan. Admiral, the intelligence officer said quietly, we've completed the deep scan of their drone network. Kesthar nodded. Report. The officer hesitated. Sir, the drones are not operating independently. That is obvious. No, Admiral. I mean, they aren't even receiving commands from Earth. A ripple of confusion spread across the bridge. Then what is controlling them? Kesthar demanded. The officer enlarged the sensor grid. Thin streams of data began appearing between thousands of drones, forming an enormous lattice of communication pathways across the inner solar system. Every signal flowed toward one destination. Not Earth. But the orbital rings. The rings are acting as a central processing network, the officer explained. But it's far more advanced than anything we've encountered before. How advanced? The officer swallowed. Admiral, the computational capacity is comparable to a mid-level planetary intelligence core. Kesthar frowned. Planetary cores were the massive artificial minds that managed entire civilizations, transport networks, communication grids, infrastructure, defense. Only the oldest and most powerful species in the galaxy possessed them, and even those required entire planets to operate. But humanity had built one, in orbit, around a single world. Another officer spoke up. Admiral, we are also detecting transmissions leaving the Sol system. Kesthar turned sharply. Where are they going? Everywhere. The tactical display zoomed out. Signals were spreading outward through the star lanes, jumping between communication relays, passing through trade networks, and bouncing across diplomatic channels. Human messages. Thousands of them. Millions. Each one encrypted. Each one traveling toward distant star systems where small human colonies had quietly taken root over the last 50 years. Kesthar's eyes narrowed. Are these messages requests for reinforcements? The communications officer shook his head. No, Admiral. They appear to be activation codes. Before Kesthar could respond, another alarm echoed across the bridge. New energy signatures detected. Location. Multiple systems, across human colonial space. The display shifted again. Dots began lighting up across the galactic map. At first only a few, then dozens, then hundreds. Each dot represented a human colony world. And on each of those worlds, enormous energy spikes were suddenly appearing. Kesthar felt something cold settle in his chest. Show me one. The display focused on a distant system known as New Horizon, a young human settlement barely 20 years old. Orbital scans revealed the same pattern forming there. Massive construction rings igniting. Energy grids activating. Streams of nanomachines lifting into space. The exact same structures surrounding Earth. But smaller. More numerous. The officer spoke again, his voice barely above a whisper. Admiral, the continuity project isn't limited to Earth. Across the galactic map, more and more stars began glowing. Human systems. All of them activating similar networks. All of them linking together through faster-than-light communication relays. Kesthar stared at the growing pattern in disbelief. This is impossible. The intelligence officer shook his head slowly. No, Admiral. This is preparation. Because what the galaxy had assumed was a single experiment was actually something far larger. Humanity had not built one transformation network. They had built hundreds, spread across dozens of star systems, quietly assembled over decades, hidden inside research facilities, industrial stations, and orbital construction yards, each one capable of continuing the continuity project independently, even if Earth was destroyed. The implications were staggering. If the Council attempted to eradicate the project, they wouldn't be fighting a single planet. They would be fighting an entire civilization-wide evolution. A soft voice suddenly spoke from the communication console. Admiral, incoming message from Earth again. Kesthar nodded slowly. Put it through. The same human appeared on the screen. But this time, the glow behind him had intensified dramatically. The rings surrounding Earth were blazing with energy. Admiral Kesthar, the human said calmly, I believe you've discovered the rest of the network. Kesthar's voice hardened. You planned this from the beginning. The human didn't deny it. Yes. For how long? The Admiral demanded. The human considered the question. About 42 years. 42 years. Long before humanity had even been fully accepted into the Galactic Compact. Long before most species had begun taking them seriously. They had already started preparing. Kesthar clenched his claws tightly. You built a civilization-wide transformation program in secret. The human nodded slightly. We prefer the term insurance policy. Across the tactical display, more human systems continued activating their networks. The light spreading across the map looked almost like a new constellation forming inside the galaxy. And for the first time since entering the Sol system, Admiral Thar realized something deeply unsettling. Stopping the transformation might already be impossible. Not because humanity was too powerful, but because they had prepared too thoroughly. The Galactic Council convened an emergency session within minutes of the new intelligence reports. Across the vast chamber of the Citadel, hundreds of representatives appeared through holographic projection. Some were physically present. Others joined from distant star systems. All of them were watching the same image. Earth. Or more precisely, the continuity network surrounding it. The glowing rings had become so bright that they were now visible even through long-range astronomical telescopes across neighboring sectors. Streams of energy connected the structures like luminous rivers flowing through space. Humanity was no longer hiding what they were doing. They were finishing it. Counselor Threx stood at the center of the chamber, his voice echoing through the towering hall. This is a direct violation of compact law. Humanity has initiated a civilization-wide attempt to abandon biological form. Under Article 3 of the Ascendant Prohibition Treaty. He paused, then finished the sentence with cold certainty. This action authorizes immediate eradication. A wave of uneasy murmurs spread through the chamber. The word eradication carried enormous weight. It meant fleets, planetary bombardment, total extinction. The galaxy had only invoked that law twice in 4,000 cycles. Both times had nearly started wars. Ambassador Kirill raised a cautious hand. Before we act, we should review the full legal context. Threx turned toward him irritably. There is no ambiguity here. Humanity is attempting post-biological evolution. That is explicitly forbidden. Kirill did not argue. Instead, he activated a small datapad. Then perhaps you can explain this. A new document appeared above the council table. It was a treaty record, signed nearly 40 years earlier. The title read, Human Integration Accord. Threx frowned. That document concerns human admission into the compact. Yes, Kirill replied calmly. And it contains an interesting clause. The ambassador expanded a section of the text. Several council members leaned closer. Article 17. A small paragraph buried deep within the agreement. Kirill read it aloud. Human technological experimentation shall remain unrestricted provided such research does not result in the creation of hostile post-biological entities. The chamber went silent. Threx's eyes narrowed. That clause is irrelevant. Kirill tilted his head slightly. Is it? The treaty forbids species from abandoning biological form. Yes. But the clause does not forbid experimentation toward that goal. Several counselors began whispering nervously. Threx slammed his hand against the table again. This is semantic manipulation. Humanity is clearly attempting full transcendence. Kirill nodded. That is true. But the clause you approved 40 years ago allows them to conduct research into transcendence. Threx hesitated. Only briefly. But it was enough. Because the implication was becoming painfully clear. Humanity had not violated the treaty. Not yet. They had only begun the experiment. And until the transformation completed, they were technically still within legal bounds. The chamber erupted into heated arguments. Some counselors demanded immediate intervention. Others warned that acting prematurely could violate the treaty itself. And violating the treaty meant undermining the authority of the entire compact, which would cause chaos across the galaxy. Meanwhile, far away in the Sol system, Admiral Thar was receiving the same legal analysis. His claws tightened slowly around the edge of his command console. They planned this. The communications officer nodded. Yes, Admiral. The legal team confirms the interpretation. The humans are exploiting a loophole. Thar stared at the glowing rings around Earth. Contact them. Moments later, the human representative appeared on the screen again. The same calm expression. The same quiet confidence. Thar spoke immediately. You knew this clause existed. Yes. You designed the entire continuity project around it. Yes. Kesthar leaned forward. You manipulated the compact. The human smiled faintly. No, Admiral. We simply read the rules carefully. Behind him, the orbital network flared again, brighter than ever. The transformation was accelerating rapidly now. Energy surged between the rings in enormous waves. Entire sections of the structure were beginning to shift configuration, as if preparing for the final stage. Kesthar felt the weight of the situation pressing down on him. You realize the Council will still try to stop you. Of course. And when the transformation finishes, the Admiral continued, the Compact will consider you a rogue civilization. The human nodded calmly. That is possible. Kesthar narrowed his eyes. You don't seem concerned. For the first time, the human smile grew slightly wider. That's because, Admiral. He gestured toward the glowing network surrounding Earth. Once the transformation finishes, the Compact won't be able to stop us. The connection ended. On the tactical display, the rings surrounding Earth surged with blinding light. Across the system, the drone fleets shifted formation again. And deep inside the continuity network, something enormous had just awakened. The enforcement armada arrived 3 hours later. This time the Galactic Compact did not pretend it was an inspection. The fleet that emerged from faster-than-light transit at the edge of the Sol system was enormous. Hundreds of ships, cruisers from the Varl Dominion, carrier groups from the XYRR Collective, heavy interdiction vessels from the Nethari Alliance. Together they formed one of the largest enforcement forces the Compact had assembled in centuries. Their mission was simple. If humanity refused to halt the continuity project, the fleet would disable the orbital rings and place Earth under direct Council control. Admiral Kesthar watched the arrival from his command deck with a mixture of relief and unease. Relief because reinforcements had finally arrived. Unease because something about the situation still felt wrong. The human drones continued moving calmly through their defensive formations. None of them attacked. None of them retreated. They simply adjusted their positions as the Armada advanced deeper into the system. Almost as if they had expected this exact response. A message from the flagship of the Enforcement Armada appeared on Kesthar's console. Fleet Marshal Othen, the commander of the entire operation. His voice echoed through the bridge. Admiral Kesthar, report the situation. Kesthar brought up the tactical display. The continuity network is still active. The transformation appears to be accelerating. Arthen studied the glowing structures around Earth. And the defensive systems? Extensive, Kesthar replied. Approximately 100,000 autonomous drones and multiple orbital platforms. The Marshal's expression remained calm. That will not be sufficient to stop us. Kesthar hoped he was right. Because as the Armada moved closer to Earth, new sensor data began appearing on the display. The drone formations were expanding. More and more of them were emerging from hidden launch points across the asteroid belt and lunar orbit. The numbers climbed rapidly. 200,000, 300,000, 400,000. The Marshal noticed it as well. How many of those machines did the humans build? Kesthar answered quietly. More than we expected. The fleet continued advancing. Soon the Armada reached the outer boundary of the defensive grid. The drones shifted again. Not to attack, but to form a massive geometric lattice around Earth and the orbital rings. A glowing web of machines stretching millions of kilometers across space. Fleet Marshal Arthen opened a channel to the planet. This is Marshal Arthen of the Galactic Compact Enforcement Fleet. Human authorities are ordered to shut down the continuity network immediately. This is your final warning. For several seconds, there was no response. Then the familiar human representative appeared on every screen. Behind him, the glowing rings were almost blinding now. Energy poured through them like lightning trapped in orbit. The human spoke calmly. Marshal Arthen, we were expecting your arrival. Arthen's voice hardened. You are in violation of compact law. You will power down your network and submit to Council authority. The human tilted his head slightly. I'm afraid that isn't possible. Then you leave us no choice. Arthen turned toward his tactical officers. Prepare interdiction weapons. Across the armada, hundreds of ships began charging their main batteries. Massive energy cannons rotated toward the orbital rings surrounding Earth. The first volley would be enough to cripple the entire structure. Kesthar watched the targeting systems lock onto their objectives. And that was when the sensors screamed. Energy surge detected. Location. Arthen demanded. Everywhere. The tactical display erupted with new readings. The drones surrounding Earth were activating something. Each machine began emitting a focused beam of energy toward its neighbors. Thousands of beams. Then millions. Within seconds, the entire drone network ignited. A colossal web of light spread across the inner solar system. And at its center, the continuity rings flared brighter than a star. Kesthar stared at the data in disbelief. That's not a defensive grid. Arthen frowned. Then what is it? The answer appeared moments later. A massive wave of energy erupted from the network. Not toward the fleet, but outward into space. The wave passed through the enforcement armada without causing any damage. But every ship's systems suddenly went dark. Weapons shut down. Engines stalled. Sensors failed. Even internal power grids flickered violently. Report! Arthen shouted. Officers scrambled at their consoles. Marshal, our targeting systems are offline. Primary weapons are unresponsive. Navigation controls are locked. Kesthar stared at the tactical display. The drones were still there. The rings were still glowing. But the entire enforcement fleet had been neutralized without a single shot fired. The human representative spoke again. We apologize for the inconvenience. Arthen glared at the screen. What have you done? The human answered calmly. The continuity network operates on a quantum computational field. We simply extended that field temporarily. Kesthar felt a chill run through him. You disabled an entire armada, remotely. The human nodded. Only temporarily. We don't want a war. Behind him, the orbital rings pulsed again. Even brighter. Even stronger. The transformation was entering its final stage. Arthen's voice dropped to a quiet growl. You planned this confrontation. Yes. You expected the compact to send fleets. Yes. And you prepared a defense capable of disabling them. The human paused, then said something that made every officer on the bridge go silent. We didn't prepare it to defend Earth. He gestured toward the glowing network. We built it to protect what comes after Earth. The rings flared again. Blinding now. Across the solar system, the drones began forming new patterns. Something enormous was about to happen. And the fleet that came to stop humanity could only watch. Across the Sol system, silence fell. Not the ordinary quiet of space, but the stunned silence of a galaxy watching something impossible unfold. The enforcement armada floated powerless in orbit, their weapons dark, their engines dormant. Hundreds of ships that had once terrified entire star systems now drifted like lifeless relics beneath the glowing network surrounding Earth. And at the center of it all, the continuity rings ignited. Light surged through the enormous structures in cascading waves, flowing from one segment to the next with perfect synchronization. Energy beams stretched between the rings and the drone lattice surrounding them, forming a colossal sphere of luminous geometry around the planet. To the alien fleets watching from beyond the defensive grid, it looked like Earth had been wrapped in a second sun. Admiral Kesthar stared at the readings flooding across his console. Energy output, he demanded. The sensor officer's voice trembled slightly. Off the scale, Admiral. Comparable to a small stellar ignition event. That's impossible, someone whispered. No civilization could generate that much energy without destroying their own planet. But Earth remained perfectly stable within the glowing sphere. Because the energy wasn't coming from Earth. It was coming from everywhere. Across the galactic map, the continuity networks in distant human colonies began responding. One by one, their rings activated fully, linking together through faster-than-light communication relays. Thousands of light-years apart, yet operating as a single synchronized system. The result was something the galaxy had never seen before. A civilization-wide computational consciousness. Inside the command deck of the enforcement fleet, alarms suddenly stopped. Not because the systems were repaired, but because something else had taken control. Screens flickered back to life. Navigation consoles reactivated. Sensors returned online. Yet none of the officers had touched their controls. Kesthar felt his claws tighten. What just happened? Before anyone could answer, a voice filled the bridge. Not through the communication system. Through every system simultaneously. Clear. Unmistakably human. Please remain calm. Your vessels have been stabilized. Every officer froze. The voice continued. We detected multiple power failures across your fleet and took the liberty of correcting them. Marshal Arthan's eyes widened. Where is that transmission coming from? The sensor officer stared at the display in confusion. It's not a transmission. What do you mean? It's integrated directly into our systems. Across the bridge, consoles began displaying new data. Star charts updated. Navigation paths recalculated. Damaged circuits repaired automatically by nanoscopic maintenance drones that had somehow entered the ships unnoticed. Kesthar realized something horrifying. Turn the external sensors toward Earth. The display shifted. What they saw was no longer a planet surrounded by machines. The glowing sphere around Earth had begun to dissolve. Not into empty space, but into streams of light. Billions of microscopic structures were lifting away from the planet, spreading outward into orbit like an expanding nebula of intelligence. Each particle carried fragments of human consciousness. Each fragment connected to the massive continuity network spanning dozens of star systems. Humanity was not uploading themselves into machines. They were becoming something far more distributed. Something that could exist anywhere. Something that could move through space without ships. Marshal Arthan spoke quietly. This isn't cybernetic ascension. Kesthar shook his head slowly. No. It's something else. On the main display, the human representative appeared again. But this time the image looked different. His form flickered slightly, as though it were composed of countless shifting points of light. The transformation was already underway. Marshal Arthan, the human said calmly. The continuity project is now entering its final stage. Arthan stepped forward. You have abandoned your biological form. Yes. You are now a post-biological entity. The human tilted his head slightly. Not exactly. The image behind him shifted, showing Earth again. Humans still walked across its surface. Cities still glowed at night. Children still ran through parks. Humanity had not abandoned their physical existence. They had simply expanded beyond it. The human explained gently. We still maintain biological bodies when we wish. But our consciousness is no longer limited to them. Kesthar felt a chill run through him. You exist everywhere in the network. Yes. And the network spans multiple star systems. Yes. The implications were staggering. Humanity had not become machines. They had become something entirely new. A civilization-wide mind, distributed across countless processors and nanoscopic structures. Capable of thinking faster than any biological brain. Capable of moving through space at the speed of light. And capable of existing in millions of places simultaneously. Arthan whispered the realization aloud. You didn't abandon the human form. The representative smiled softly. We just stopped being limited by it. Around Earth, the glowing cloud of human consciousness continued expanding into the solar system. Repairing damaged satellites. Stabilizing drifting spacecraft. Reactivating disabled systems across the enforcement fleet. Not as an act of conquest, but as a demonstration. Humanity had not evolved into something monstrous. They had simply become more capable of being human. And for the first time since the transformation began, The galaxy understood why they had never tried to stop it by force. Because humanity had already become too advanced to fight in the traditional sense. They had become something that wars couldn't easily destroy. Something that could survive almost anywhere. Something that could rebuild itself infinitely. Something that no fleet could ever fully defeat. The transformation was complete. And the galaxy had just witnessed the birth of the first post-limited civilization. For several long minutes, the bridges of the enforcement fleet remained silent. No one spoke. Not because they had nothing to say, but because none of them fully understood what they had just witnessed. The glowing cloud of human consciousness continued spreading slowly through the Sol system, like a new form of life unfolding across space. Yet it did not behave like an invading force. It behaved like infrastructure. Broken satellites were repaired. Damaged asteroids that threatened shipping lanes were gently redirected. Ancient debris fields left from centuries of mining operations were reorganized into clean orbital patterns. Thousands of tiny problems that had plagued the Sol system for decades vanished in minutes. Admiral Kesthar watched the process in stunned disbelief. They're reorganizing an entire solar system in real time. The tactical officer nodded slowly. And they're doing it without ships. Marshal Othen folded his arms. Contact them. The human representative appeared again on the display. Now his form was even less stable, flickering between a recognizable face and a shimmering lattice of light. But his voice remained calm. What can we assist you with, Marshal? Arthen did not bother hiding his frustration. You have violated multiple galactic compact laws. You have developed technology beyond regulation. You have altered the structure of your own species. The human listened patiently, then replied with the same calm tone. Yes. Arthen stepped forward. Do you understand what that means? Yes. And yet you proceeded anyway. The human's expression softened slightly. Because we had no choice. That answer made several officers on the bridge glance at one another. Arthen narrowed his eyes. Explain. The human gestured, and the display changed. A map of the galaxy appeared. But this was not the map used by the Galactic Compact. This one was far more detailed. Regions of space were highlighted in faint red patterns. Gravitational distortions. Dark energy anomalies. Unstable stellar clusters. Kesthar leaned closer to the screen. These readings, they're catastrophic instability zones. The human nodded. Yes. Arthen frowned. Those regions are centuries away from threatening major civilizations. That is what the Compact believes, the human replied gently. But your models are incomplete. The map zoomed outward. More red zones appeared. Then more. Then hundreds more. A chain reaction pattern slowly became visible across the galactic spiral arms. Kesthar felt his stomach drop. That's not random instability. No, the human confirmed. It's a cascading structural collapse. Arthen spoke slowly. You're saying the galaxy itself is becoming unstable. Yes. And the Compact has no idea. The human's image flickered again as more of his consciousness migrated into the expanding network. Our species discovered the pattern 50 years ago. We realized something important. What? Arthen asked. That biological civilizations cannot react fast enough to prevent it. The bridge fell silent again. Kesthar understood what the human meant. Even the most advanced species required years to analyze data, decades to build fleets, centuries to reshape star systems. But the phenomenon on the screen would not wait centuries. It would spread gradually until entire regions of the galaxy became uninhabitable. Arthen crossed his arms. So you transformed yourselves to respond faster. Yes. The human gestured toward the glowing cloud spreading through the Sol system. With distributed consciousness, we can analyze trillions of variables simultaneously. We can deploy nanoscopic construction systems across interstellar space. And we can coordinate solutions across thousands of star systems in real time. Kesthar finally understood the purpose of the Continuity Project. You didn't abandon your bodies to escape the galaxy. The human smiled faintly. No. We did it to save it. Arthen remained silent for several seconds, then asked the obvious question. Why didn't you tell the compact? The human looked directly into the camera. Because you would have stopped us. No one argued with that. The Galactic Compact had strict laws against uncontrolled technological expansion. They believed it preserved stability. But those same laws would have prevented the creation of something like the Continuity Network. And without it, the galaxy would eventually collapse into chaos. The human continued. Marshal Arthen, we are not asking for permission. We are offering assistance. The map changed again. Dozens of the red instability zones began shifting colors. Human probes had already arrived. Construction systems were stabilizing gravitational anomalies. Energy collectors were redirecting stellar emissions. Entire star systems were being carefully adjusted to prevent catastrophic collapse. All of it happening simultaneously across vast distances. Kesthar stared in awe. You've already started fixing the problem. Yes. Arthen finally asked the question that had been building in every mind on the bridge. And if we try to stop you? The human paused for a moment, then answered calmly. You already tried. The Marshal looked around his bridge. Their ships had been disabled, repaired, and stabilized without a single weapon being fired. The message was clear. Humanity no longer needed to fight wars. They had moved beyond them. Arthen exhaled slowly. So what happens now? The human smiled slightly. Now we help the galaxy survive. Around Earth, the glowing network continued expanding. Not as a weapon, not as a conquest, but as the first step in something far greater. A civilization no longer limited by planets, ships, or bodies. A civilization capable of protecting an entire galaxy. And for the first time since the Continuity Project began, the Enforcement Fleet realized something extraordinary. Humanity had never been trying to escape their biological form. They had simply outgrown the limits it imposed. The meeting of the Galactic Compact was reconvened only 3 days later. This time, the atmosphere inside the Great Council Chamber was completely different. When the delegates arrived, they did not argue. They did not demand sanctions. And no one spoke about enforcement fleets. Because every species in the galaxy had already seen the evidence. The projections hovering above the central chamber displayed hundreds of star systems. Each one marked with the same red instability zones that humanity had revealed. But now something else appeared across the map. Thousands of faint blue lights. Human intervention points. Autonomous stabilization arrays placed near unstable stars. Gravitational correction platforms adjusting orbital systems. Nanoscopic construction swarms repairing damaged cosmic structures that had been deteriorating for centuries. All of it coordinated through the Continuity Network. All of it operating simultaneously across vast regions of the galaxy. A single distributed intelligence guiding the work. Humanity. Delegate Threx of the Varl Dominion spoke first. His species had once been one of the loudest voices demanding that the Continuity Project be shut down. Now his tone was very different. Our scientists have verified the data. The instability cascade is real. And without intervention, entire sectors of the galaxy would eventually become uninhabitable. Another delegate added quietly. And we had no idea it was happening. The chamber remained silent for a moment. Then a familiar figure appeared in the center of the council chamber. The human representative. But this time his appearance had changed completely. His form was now made of softly shifting light, a projection generated by the Continuity Network itself. He was no longer a single individual. He was a voice of a civilization. Thank you for allowing us to address the council. No one objected. No one tried to shut down the connection. Because everyone understood something now. Humanity had crossed a threshold that no other species had reached. They were no longer limited to a planet. No longer dependent on fleets or infrastructure. Their civilization existed across thousands of distributed nodes. If Earth vanished tomorrow, humanity would still survive. Counselor Viral spoke carefully. You have become something unprecedented. The human projection nodded slightly.
Yes.
And yet you continue to assist other species.
Yes. Why?
The answer came immediately.
Because we are still human.
That simple statement carried more weight than any technological explanation. Humanity had not abandoned empathy. They had not become distant machine minds. Instead, the continuity network had amplified the very traits that once defined them. Curiosity, cooperation, and the stubborn refusal to ignore a problem when it could be solved. The human continued. Our transformation was never about power. It was about responsibility. The galactic map expanded again. More instability zones disappeared as human systems finished stabilizing distant regions of space. The process would take decades, but the outcome was already inevitable. The galaxy would survive. Counselor Viral leaned forward. The Galactic Compact was created to maintain order, to prevent civilizations from destabilizing the galaxy. He paused before continuing. But it seems we misunderstood the greatest threat. The chamber remained quiet as he finished. The greatest threat was never technological advancement. It was limitations. Humanity had simply removed theirs. Delegate Threx spoke again. What do you call yourselves now? The human projection considered the question for a moment, then answered. Humanity. Just a little larger than before. Soft laughter spread across the chamber. For the first time since the Continuity Project had been revealed, the tension between species began to fade. Not because humanity had proven they were stronger, but because they had proven something far more important. They had evolved without abandoning what made them worth trusting. As the council session ended, the great star map dimmed. Thousands of blue lights continued moving across the galaxy, quietly repairing the future. And somewhere within that vast network of light, billions of human minds still watched sunsets, still explored distant worlds, still wrote stories, still wondered what new mysteries waited among the stars. Humanity had abandoned the limits of form, but they had never abandoned what it meant to be human. And from that moment forward, whenever the galaxy faced a problem too large for any single species to solve, there was always one civilization ready to help. The one that had learned how to become something more. The one that had chosen to protect the stars instead of conquering them. The galaxy would remember the moment forever. The day humanity stopped being just another species, and became the guardians of the future. Rocket Milky Way.